long before his name became permanently tied to the trial of Jesus Christ. The man known as Pontius Pilate was simply another ambitious official serving the vast and powerful Roman Empire. Rome ruled over enormous territories stretching across continents, and maintaining order in those distant provinces required governors who could enforce Roman authority, collect taxes, and prevent rebellion at any cost. Pilate was one of those men. Very little is known about his early life before he entered the service of Rome. Like many officials in the empire, he likely came from a family connected to the Roman administrative or military system. Advancement within Roman politics required loyalty to the empire, skill in leadership, and the ability to manage difficult territories far from the capital. Pilate eventually gained the attention of powerful figures in Rome, and through political connections, he was appointed governor of one of the most challenging regions in the empire. That region was Judea. The province of Judea was unlike many other Roman territories. Its people held deep religious traditions and strong national identity. They believed they were the chosen people of their God, and their laws and customs were rooted in ancient scriptures that governed every part of life. The center of their faith stood in Jerusalem, where the great temple rose above the city as the heart of Jewish worship. For Rome, controlling Judea required constant caution. The people of the region had a long history of resisting foreign rulers. Revolts had erupted in the past, and rumors of rebellion could spread quickly during times of political tension. Roman leaders understood that even small disturbances in Judea could grow into dangerous uprisings if they were not handled carefully. This was the environment that Pontius Pilate stepped into when he became governor. Around the year 26 AD, his official residence was located in the coastal city of Caesarea, a Roman administrative center built along the Mediterranean Sea. From there he governed the province on behalf of the emperor. However, during major religious festivals, especially the festival of Passover, Pilate often traveled to Jerusalem to oversee security personally. Passover was one of the most important celebrations in Jewish tradition. It commemorated the ancient story of liberation from slavery in Egypt, when according to their scriptures, God had delivered the Israelites from the rule of Pharaoh. During this festival, thousands of pilgrims traveled to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. With such massive crowds gathering in one place, the Roman authorities feared that excitement and religious fervor could easily spark unrest. To prevent rebellion, Roman soldiers were stationed throughout the city, watching carefully for any sign of trouble. Pilate's job during these times was simple in theory but difficult in practice. He had to keep order, but maintaining order in Jerusalem meant navigating a complex relationship between Roman power and Jewish religious leadership. The temple was controlled by the high priests and religious authorities who held enormous influence over the people. While Rome allowed them to maintain certain aspects of religious governance, ultimate political authority remained in the hands of the Roman governor. This balance of power often created tension. Pilate himself developed a reputation among the Jewish population as a harsh and sometimes insensitive ruler. Historical writings from ancient historians, such as Flavius Josephus, describe several incidents during Pilate's governorship that angered the local population. In one early incident, Pilate ordered Roman soldiers to bring imperial banners bearing the image of the emperor into Jerusalem. To Romans, these banners were simple symbols of authority, but to the Jewish people, displaying human images within the holy city violated their religious laws against idolatry. The reaction was immediate and intense. Large crowds of Jewish citizens protested the decision, demanding that the banners be removed. According to historical accounts, they surrounded Pilate's residence and refused to leave until he reversed the order. Pilate initially threatened them with execution, but when the protesters continued to stand firm, even offering their own necks rather than accept the violation of their laws, Pilate eventually relented and removed the banners from the city. Another conflict occurred when Pilate used funds from the temple treasury to finance the construction of an aqueduct that would bring water into Jerusalem. Although the project itself could benefit the city, using sacred temple money for a Roman public works project outraged many religious leaders. Once again, protests erupted. This time Pilate responded with force. Roman soldiers disguised in civilian clothing infiltrated the crowd, and when the signal was given, they attacked the protesters with clubs. The clash turned violent, leaving many injured or dead. Events like these shaped Pilate's relationship with the people he governed. To the Romans, he was fulfilling his duty by maintaining control and suppressing unrest. But to many in Judea, Pilate represented the harsh authority of a foreign empire that ruled over them without understanding their beliefs. Years passed as Pilate continued governing the province. During that time, new teachers, prophets, and preachers occasionally appeared among the Jewish people. Some gathered followers and spoke about spiritual renewal or the coming kingdom of God. Most of these movements faded quietly without attracting the attention of Roman authorities. But one teacher would soon rise whose influence would spread farther than anyone could have imagined. His name was Jesus of Nazareth. By the time Pontius Pilate encountered this man, reports about him had already spread throughout the region. Stories circulated about miraculous healings, powerful teachings, and growing crowds following him wherever he traveled. Many people believed he might be the long-awaited Messiah, the anointed king, promised in Jewish prophecy. Others saw him simply as another wandering preacher. Yet, as his influence grew, the religious leaders in Jerusalem began to view him as a serious threat to their authority. Tensions between Jesus and the temple leadership increased as he openly criticized corruption among the religious elite and challenged their interpretation of the law. Crowds listened to him eagerly, and his popularity continued to grow. Eventually, the conflict reached a point where the religious authorities decided that Jesus had to be stopped. But there was a problem. Under Roman rule, the Jewish leaders did not have the authority to carry out an execution for a crime, such as blasphemy or rebellion. If they wanted Jesus condemned to death, they would need the approval of the Roman governor, and that meant bringing him before Pontius Pilate. At that moment, Pilate likely saw the situation as just another case among many he had handled during his years of governing Judea. Accusations, disputes, and political conflicts were part of the daily responsibilities of a Roman official. But this case would be different, because the decision Pilate was about to face would echo through history for thousands of years, and the man standing before him would become the most famous prisoner ever brought into a Roman courtroom. By the time the final days before the Passover festival arrived, the city of Jerusalem had once again filled with thousands of pilgrims who had traveled from across Judea and beyond. The narrow streets overflowed with worshippers, merchants, priests, and travelers who had come to celebrate one of the most sacred events in Jewish tradition. The temple stood at the center of the city, towering above the surrounding buildings, its courts filled with the sounds of prayer, sacrifice, and conversation. For the Roman authorities, however, these days were not only religious celebrations, they were also moments of potential danger. Large gatherings could easily become breeding grounds for rebellion. The memory of past revolts against Roman rule still lingered in the minds of the empire's leaders. Whenever Passover approached, the governor of Judea made sure to keep a close watch over Jerusalem. That governor was Pontius Pilate. Although his primary residence remained in Caesarea along the Mediterranean coast, Pilate traveled to Jerusalem during the festival to oversee security personally. Roman soldiers were stationed throughout the city. Guards watched the temple courts, the city gates, and the surrounding hills to ensure that no uprising would take place. During this same period, another figure had arrived in Jerusalem, drawing enormous attention from the crowds. His name was Jesus Christ. News about him had already spread across the region. For several years he had traveled through towns and villages teaching about the kingdom of God. People told stories of the miracles they believed. He had performed healing the sick, restoring sight to the blind, and even raising the dead. His words carried authority that seemed different from the teachings of the traditional religious leaders. As Jesus entered Jerusalem shortly before Passover, many people welcomed him with excitement and hope. Crowds gathered along the road as he approached the city. Some laid down cloaks and branches on the path before him while shouting praises, treating his arrival like the entrance of a king. To those watching, the moment carried enormous symbolism. Many believed that the long-promised Messiah had finally arrived, but not everyone shared the same enthusiasm. Among the religious leaders who controlled the temple, Jesus' growing popularity caused deep concern. His teachings often challenged their authority, and his criticism of corruption within the temple system had already angered many powerful figures. The tension reached a dramatic point when Jesus entered the temple courts and confronted the merchants and money changers who operated there. According to the gospel accounts, he overturned their tables and accused them of turning a sacred place of prayer into a marketplace. For the temple authorities, this act was more than just a protest. It was a direct challenge to the system they controlled. From that moment forward, the chief priests and religious leaders began searching for a way to remove him. But there was a problem. Jesus had become extremely popular among the people. Arresting him publicly could spark unrest among the crowds who admired him. The leaders needed a way to deal with him quietly, away from public attention. That opportunity eventually came through one of Jesus' own disciples. Judas Iscariot approached the chief priests and offered them information that would allow them to capture Jesus at night when the crowds were no longer surrounding him. In exchange, they agreed to pay him 30 pieces of silver. Late one night, guided by Judas, temple guards, and Soldiers arrested Jesus in a place called the Garden of Gethsemane, just outside the city walls. Once he was in their custody, the religious leaders brought him before their council to question him. They accused him of blasphemy and of claiming divine authority. From their perspective, his teachings and actions threatened the religious structure they were responsible for protecting. But there was another obstacle standing in their way. Under Roman law, they did not have the authority to carry out a death sentence. If they wanted Jesus executed, they needed the approval of the Roman governor. And so, early the next morning, they brought Jesus to the Roman headquarters where Pontius Pilate was staying during the festival. The scene must have appeared strange even to the Roman officials watching the event unfold. A group of religious leaders from the local population had arrived with a prisoner they were eager to condemn. Yet instead of presenting a simple religious dispute, they framed their accusations in political terms. They claimed that Jesus had been stirring up the people. They said he claimed to be a king. To the Roman authorities, that accusation carried serious implications. Rome tolerated many religious beliefs among the peoples it governed, but it did not tolerate rebellion. Any individual claiming royal authority within Roman territory could be seen as challenging the power of the emperor himself. When Pilate first encountered the situation, he likely approached it with the practical mindset of a Roman administrator. His responsibility was not to resolve religious disagreements, but to maintain political stability. He ordered that the prisoner be brought before him. There, in the Roman court, the governor came face to face with the man whose name would eventually become known across the entire world. Jesus stood before Pilate without weapons, without soldiers, and without the appearance of a political revolutionary. Yet the accusations against him suggested something far more serious. Pilate began questioning him directly. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked. The question addressed the core of the accusation being presented against Jesus. If he truly claimed to be a king, in opposition to Roman authority, the charge could justify execution. But Jesus answered in a way that did not fit the expectations of a political rebel. According to the gospel accounts, he explained that his kingdom was not of this world. His mission was not about overthrowing Roman rule or establishing a political government. Pilate listened carefully as the interrogation continued. The situation was becoming more complicated than he expected. The prisoner standing before him did not behave like someone leading a rebellion. He did not call for resistance. He did not attempt to defend himself aggressively. In fact, at many points during the questioning, Jesus remained silent while accusations were thrown against him. To Pilate, this silence must have been unusual. Roman governors were accustomed to dealing with criminals who pleaded desperately for mercy or argued fiercely in their defense. Yet this man stood calmly, speaking only when necessary. As the questioning continued, Pilate began to form an opinion about the case, and that opinion would soon place him in the middle of a political dilemma that would test his authority, his judgment, and his willingness to stand against the demands of an angry crowd. As the questioning continued inside the Roman court, the tension surrounding the trial began to grow. The religious leaders stood nearby, watching closely, waiting for the moment when the Roman governor would declare the prisoner guilty. Outside the building, a crowd was already gathering. drawn by the rumors spreading through Jerusalem that the teacher from Galilee had been arrested. The man at the center of it all stood quietly before the Roman authority. Pontius Pilate had likely presided over countless legal disputes during his years as governor of Judea. Criminals, rebels, thieves, and political agitators had all passed through his court at one time or another. The Roman system of justice was known for its efficiency and severity. If a man was guilty of challenging Roman power, the punishment could be swift and brutal. Yet this situation did not seem to fit the usual pattern. The accusations presented against Jesus Christ were serious, but the behavior of the prisoner did not resemble that of someone trying to start a rebellion. He did not speak about overthrowing Rome. He did not rally supporters to fight against the empire. Instead, his answers seemed to point towards something entirely different, something spiritual rather than political. Pilate listened carefully as the religious leaders continued presenting their case. They insisted that Jesus was dangerous, that he stirred up the people throughout Judea with his teachings. They warned that anyone claiming to be a king could threaten Roman order. Still, Pilate remained unconvinced. According to the Gospel accounts, he eventually turned to the crowd and made a statement that must have frustrated the religious leaders standing nearby. "I find no basis for a charge against this man." Those words revealed Pilate's personal judgment of the situation. From his perspective as a Roman governor, the accusations did not justify a death sentence. Whatever disagreements existed between Jesus and the religious authorities appeared to be internal disputes within the Jewish community rather than crimes against Rome. But the leaders were not ready to accept that conclusion. They continued pressing their accusations more aggressively. They argued that Jesus had been teaching throughout the entire region, beginning in Galilee and spreading his influence all the way to Jerusalem. When Pilate heard the mention of Galilee, he saw an opportunity to move the case elsewhere. Galilee fell under the jurisdiction of another ruler, a regional authority named Herod Antipas. Herod happened to be in Jerusalem during the Passover festival, just like Pilate. So the Roman governor decided to send the prisoner to Herod. If Jesus was from Galilee, then perhaps Herod should be the one to deal with the situation. When Jesus was brought before Herod Antipas, the encounter took on a very different tone. Herod had heard stories about Jesus for a long time and had become curious about the mysterious teacher whose reputation had spread across the region. Some accounts suggest that Herod even hoped to witness a miracle performed by Jesus. But Jesus refused to entertain him. When questioned by Herod, he remained mostly silent, offering no answers that would satisfy the ruler's curiosity. The chief priests and religious leaders continued accusing him fiercely, but the situation did not produce the dramatic outcome they desired. Eventually, Herod lost interest in the matter. Instead of issuing a judgment, he mocked the situation. According to the Gospel accounts, his soldiers dressed Jesus in an elegant robe, treating him like a false king before sending him back to Pilate. Ironically, this unusual exchange helped improve the relationship between Pilate and Herod. Historical tensions had existed between the two rulers, but the handling of this case created a moment of cooperation between them. Now the responsibility returned once again to Pontius Pilate. Back in the Roman court, Pilate addressed the religious leaders and the growing crowd that had gathered outside. He reminded them that both he and Herod had examined the prisoner and found no evidence of a crime worthy of death. In an attempt to calm the situation, Pilate proposed a compromise. He suggested that Jesus could be punished and then released. Such a solution might satisfy the anger of the crowd. Without resorting to execution, Roman authorities sometimes used public punishment, such as flogging, as a warning without imposing the ultimate penalty. But the situation was quickly spiraling beyond Pilate's control. During the Passover festival, the Roman governor traditionally allowed the release of one prisoner chosen by the people. It was a political gesture meant to ease tensions between the Roman authorities and the local population. Pilate decided to use this custom as another way to resolve the conflict. Among the prisoners being held by the Romans at that time was a man named Barabbas. Unlike Jesus, Barabbas had been involved in violent rebellion and had taken part in an uprising against Roman rule. Pilate presented the crowd with a choice. He offered to release either Jesus or Barabbas. From Pilate's perspective, the decision seemed obvious. Surely the people would prefer the peaceful teacher who had healed the sick and preached about love, rather than a man known for violence and rebellion. But the situation outside the court was already being influenced by the religious leaders. They moved among the crowd, urging them to demand the release of Barabbas instead. Soon the voices outside began shouting louder and louder, "Release Barabbas!" Pilate looked at the crowd in disbelief. Then he asked the question that would define the moment. "What shall I do?" Then, with Jesus who is called the Messiah, the answer came back from the crowd like a rising storm. "Crucify him!" Pilate pressed them again, asking what crime the man had committed. But the shouting only grew louder. "Crucify him!" At that moment, the Roman governor realized he was standing at the center of a dangerous situation. The crowd was growing restless. The religious leaders were determined to see Jesus executed, and any sign of disorder during the Passover festival could threaten Pilate's own position as governor. He had already faced complaints from the Jewish population in the past. If another disturbance reached the ears of the Roman emperor, his career and possibly his life could be placed at risk. Pilate now faced a choice that would define his legacy forever. On one side stood his own judgment that the prisoner was innocent. On the other side stood the pressure of the crowd demanding death. And within moments, Pontius Pilate would make a decision that would echo across history for thousands of years. The noise of the crowd outside the Roman court grew louder with every passing moment. What had begun as a legal proceeding was now turning into a volatile public confrontation. The shouts echoed through the courtyard, carried by hundreds of voices demanding the same outcome: "Crucify him!" Standing before them was the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, a man whose authority allowed him to decide the fate of the prisoner brought before him. Roman law gave Pilate the final word. He had the power to release the accused or condemn him to death. Yet, despite holding this authority, Pilate appeared increasingly uneasy with the situation unfolding before him. Inside the court stood the prisoner at the center of the controversy, Jesus Christ. The accusations against him had been repeated again and again by the religious leaders. They insisted he had stirred up the people, challenged authority, and claimed a royal title that could threaten Roman rule. But Pilate had already reached his own conclusion. He did not believe the man was guilty of a crime deserving death. To Pilate, the situation looked more like a dispute between Jesus and the religious authorities who felt threatened by his teachings. As a Roman official, he had little interest in becoming involved in internal religious conflicts. Yet the growing anger of the crowd made the situation far more complicated. Pilate had attempted to resolve the matter by offering a compromise. He proposed punishing Jesus and then releasing him. He even gave the crowd a choice between freeing Jesus or freeing the rebel prisoner Barabbas. But the people had rejected that option. Encouraged by the religious leaders moving among them, the crowd demanded the release of Barabbas and called for Jesus to be crucified instead. The Roman governor now faced a serious political problem. Jerusalem during Passover was already a tense environment. Thousands of pilgrims filled the city, and the Roman soldiers stationed there were constantly alert for signs of unrest. If the crowd outside Pilate's court erupted into violence, the consequences could be severe. Rome expected its governors to maintain order at all costs. Failure to control the situation could lead to complaints being sent to the emperor himself. Pilate had already faced criticism from the Jewish population in the past for his heavy-handed decisions. Another public disturbance could damage his reputation and threaten his position. While Pilate considered his options, another unexpected message arrived. According to the Gospel of Matthew, a messenger approached him with a warning from his wife. She had experienced a troubling dream about the man on trial. Have nothing to do with that. Innocent man, the message said, for I have suffered greatly today in a dream because of him. The warning only added to Pilate's discomfort. Between his own judgment that Jesus was innocent and the strange warning from his wife, the governor found himself increasingly reluctant to issue the sentence the crowd demanded. Yet, the voices outside continued rising. Crucify him. Pilate stepped forward once more, addressing the people gathered before him. Why? He asked them. What crime has he committed? But the question did nothing to calm the crowd. Instead, their shouting grew even louder. Crucify him. At that moment, Pilate realized the situation was slipping beyond his control. The crowd was not interested in discussing evidence or legal arguments. Their demand had already been decided. They wanted death. The Roman governor now stood in the middle of a moment that required a final decision. If he refused the crowd's demands, the tension could explode into a riot. Such chaos during Passover would reflect poorly on Roman authority and potentially bring consequences from higher officials in the empire. If he agreed with the crowd, he would be condemning a man he believed had done nothing worthy of death. To symbolize his position in the matter, Pilate performed an act that would become famous throughout history. He called for water. Standing before the crowd, he washed his hands in front of them and declared, I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility. The gesture was meant to show that he did not accept moral responsibility for what was about to happen in his mind. The decision had been forced upon him by the demands of the people, but the crowd answered with chilling determination. His blood be on us and on our children. With those words echoing through the courtyard, Pilate gave the order. First, he released Barabbas. Then he commanded that Jesus be flogged. Roman flogging was a brutal punishment carried out with a whip designed to tear flesh from the body. Soldiers struck the prisoner repeatedly, often leaving victims barely able to stand afterward. After the beating, the soldiers continued mocking Jesus. They dressed him in a purple robe, placed a crown made of thorns on his head, and knelt before him sarcastically as if he were a king. "Greetings, King of the Jews," they said while striking him and spitting on him. When the soldiers finished their cruel display, they led Jesus away. The final order had been given. The sentence was crucifixion. Crucifixion was one of the most brutal methods of execution used by the Roman Empire. It was designed not only to kill, but also to serve as a public warning to anyone who might challenge Roman authority. Victims were nailed or tied to wooden crosses and left to die slowly in full view of the public, as Jesus was led away toward the place of execution. The decision made by Pontius Pilate was already becoming part of history. The Roman governor had chosen political stability over justice, and the man he had sentenced would soon face one of the most painful deaths known in the ancient world. As the soldiers led Jesus Christ away from the Roman court, the decision made by Pontius Pilate had already set the final events in motion. What had begun as a tense political situation inside a Roman courtroom was now moving toward one of the most significant moments in human history. Roman soldiers escorted Jesus through the streets of Jerusalem, carrying the crossbeam that would soon become the instrument of his execution. The crowd that had demanded his death followed along the road, some shouting insults while others watched in silence. The brutality of Roman crucifixion was well known throughout the empire. It was a punishment reserved primarily for rebels, criminals, and those Rome wished to make an example of. The place chosen for the execution lay just outside the city walls. It was a hill known as Golgotha, sometimes called the place of the skull. There the soldiers carried out the sentence Pilate had authorized. Jesus was nailed to the cross and raised up for all to see. Above his head the Romans placed a written charge describing his supposed crime. The inscription read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." The message was written in multiple languages so that anyone passing by could read it. The chief priests who had demanded the execution were not pleased with this wording. They approached Pilate with a request to change the inscription. Instead of declaring Jesus the King of the Jews, they wanted it to say that he merely claimed to be a king. But Pilate refused. "What I have written, he replied. It was a small but notable moment in the story. Although Pilate had ultimately given in to the pressure of the crowd, he would not alter the words that now stood above the cross. Hours passed as the execution continued. Roman crucifixion was intentionally slow and agonizing, often lasting many hours before death finally came. Eventually, as the afternoon drew toward evening, Jesus died on the cross. For the Roman authorities, the execution likely appeared to be the conclusion of yet another troublesome case. Rebels and criminals were crucified regularly throughout the empire, and most of them disappeared quietly from history. But this execution would not disappear. The followers of Jesus would soon begin proclaiming that his death was not the end of his story. According to their testimony, he rose from the dead 3 days later. That claim would spread rapidly through the region and eventually across the world. The name of Jesus would become one of the most influential in human history, and forever connected to that moment of judgment would be the name of the Roman governor who had authorized the sentence, Pontius Pilate. For years after the crucifixion, Pilate continued serving as governor of Judea. His administration, however, remained troubled by tensions with the local population. His methods for maintaining order often relied on force, and his relationship with the people he governed never fully improved. Eventually, another violent incident would end his career. Around the year 36 AD, Pilate ordered Roman forces to suppress a gathering of Samaritans who had assembled on a mountain. After hearing claims about sacred artifacts supposedly hidden there, the confrontation turned deadly when Roman troops attacked the group. The survivors of the incident reported the violence to the Roman governor of Syria, who oversaw the region above Judea. Concerned about the situation, the Syrian governor ordered Pilate to travel to Rome to explain his actions before the emperor. Before Pilate arrived in the capital, however, the emperor Tiberius died. What happened to Pilate afterward remains uncertain. Historical records grow quiet regarding the rest of his life. Some traditions suggest he was removed from office and lived in obscurity. Others claim he eventually took his own life. Different stories circulated in early Christian writings, but none provide clear historical certainty about his final years. Yet even without detailed records about his later life, Pontius Pilate's legacy had already been sealed. His name would appear in one of the most widely spoken declarations of Christian faith, the Apostles' Creed, where believers recited the story of Jesus' suffering under Pontius Pilate. Generation after generation would repeat those words, ensuring that the Roman governor's name would never fade from memory. Pilate himself may have viewed the trial of Jesus as just another difficult political case. During a tense festival in Jerusalem, to him, the decision might have seemed like a practical choice, made to maintain order in a volatile city. But history would remember it differently. The man who washed his hands before the crowd, in an attempt to distance himself from the responsibility, would forever be linked to the sentence that sent Jesus to the cross. The story of Pontius Pilate has therefore become more than a historical record of a Roman governor's decision. It has become a powerful reflection on the nature of power, responsibility, and moral courage. Pilate believed Jesus was innocent. He said so openly. Yet when the pressure of the crowd threatened his political stability, he allowed the execution to proceed. His story reminds us that history is often shaped not only by those who act with conviction, but also by those who hesitate when conviction is required. In the end, Pontius Pilate was a man caught between justice and political survival. And when the moment came to choose between them, he made a decision that the world would remember for thousands of years.